Welcome back to yet another episode of Page Turning. This time it's a double feature. I know it's been a while since I've done one of these episodes, but now I'm kind of glad I put it off because I get to talk about not just two books I've enjoyed immensely for a couple of years now, but the author and illustrator who crafted these tales that I've had a chance to meet a second time in my life. And this is going to be sort of a page turning / Wizard World haul video. I know people do the haul videos out there where they talk about everything they hauled in from Wizard World. Haul. What I was able to haul in from this particular creator was just his autograph and his signature on these books. But I'm glad I got the chance. I knew he was going to be at Wizard World this year, so I packed up these publications and was able to get just some brief FaceTime with the guy that I'd met many years before when I was this little 11-year-old kid, just fascinated by the world of bone. Yeah, I'm talking about Mr. Jeff Smith. He's sort of a local hometown hero for me. He went to OSU, and that's where he actually started doing the Bone cartoon in the form of the Thorn comic strip for the Lantern. And honestly, I'm really sad that we really won't see those publications again. I believe he re-released them in a limited publication called Before Bone or something like that a couple years back, but I don't know how many copies of that are still around. I might have to do some digging to see if I can find a copy of it. But I asked him when I was at the signing, are you ever going to re-release the Lantern stuff? And he kind of mentioned that he's a little, I don't know, I guess embarrassed by those tunes. So who knows if we'll ever really see them again, but if anyone can track down a copy of that Before Bone limited publication, let me know and I'll throw my hat into the bidding ring. But let's start off with Bone here. Bone is one of my favorite books of all time. Yes, books, not just comic, not just cartoon or graphic novel or whatever nomenclature you want to attach to comics these days. This is a full-on book. I mean, look at the thickness of this. It is a massive, sprawling fantasy epic, the likes of Tolkien, that just so happens to have a cutesy-ootsy little main character at its focal point. It starts off like very almost classic Disney, which makes sense because Jeff Smith claims to have been inspired by Tex Avery cartoons and the Scrooge McDuck comic strips that spawned something like DuckTales, and also Walt Kelly's Pogo. And if you go back and look at old Pogo strips, you can see a lot of influence in Jeff Smith's work there. It starts off with a very simplistic character like the Bone cousins, Phone Bone, Phony Bone, and Smiley Bone. But then soon enough they get caught up in this massive war and fantasy creatures and royalty and lost kingdoms and dark forces and magic surround them when they enter this valley that has all these colorful and interesting characters in it. I gotta say, I really got into this story when I was younger. I really enjoyed seeing these simplistically designed characters go on this grand adventure. And just the leaps and bounds that the story took as time went on. It went from simple little fun storylines like the Great Cow Race to the ultimate climactic battle between the forces of evil and the Kingdom of Athia. But what always stayed true to form throughout all of the story's run is the characterization. It's such strong characterization, not just in the Bone cousins and their distinct personalities, but also in a lot of the supporting cast within the valley. Phone Bone is your protagonist. He's very idealistic, but isn't perfect. Phony Bone is greedy and manipulative and a little too ambitious for his own good, but he has something of a good heart and really wants to look out for his cousins. Smiley Bone is just purely lovable and goofy, but also can be the most insightful member of the group when it's called for. Then you have characters like Thorn, who I believe the Lantern publication, it was surrounded more around her character than Bone became. But she is a great protagonist, a great kind of female lead in this story that starts off as a simple farm girl, but you find out there is way more to her past and way more to her than meets the eye. And then combine that with her grandma Ben and Lucius, and all the village people, the stupid rat creatures. I was saying stupid rat creatures for several years as a kid because of this book, because the stupid rat creatures, one of my favorite comedic duos in a comic book. They're unbelievable. They try to be so vicious and bloodthirsty looking, but then they have just these little idiosyncrasies that humanize them surprisingly. Like, one has an affinity for quiche and is always talking about how he wants to put Phone Bone into a quiche and eat him, and the other one's like, where's your prerogative at, man? You should be a bloodthirsty monster. And they just bicker like an old married couple, to the point where they kind of feel more like Phone Bone's sidekicks than his adversaries. Then you have scarier characters mixed into the mythology, like the rat creature king, King Dog. And then you have the hooded one, whose identity and backstory is closely tied to that of Thorn as you go on through the story. That's a great thing. This keeps you guessing as to what is going on. There's a lot of mystery at play in what looks to be, on the surface level, a kid's book. You gotta love the Jeff Smith go-to signature there. Like, the way the dude can just conjure up so much expression in a simple series of lines is pretty amazing. But I'm not just here to tout the Harvey and Eisner Award-winning characteristics of Bone. I'm also here to talk about one of his later works, Rasl. This is a completely different animal from Bone. It's rooted more in kind of crime noir, sci-fi, steampunkish aesthetic. And it's basically about this guy who jumps between time and dimensions and parallel universes to steal shit. But there's a bigger story at play as we discover more about his past and the people that he's lost and loved along the way, and these darker, mysterious forces keep continually hounding him across universes and timelines. And it also tries to tie in a little bit to a lot of theories people have had about post-industrial revolution science for several years now, into Tesla's theories about, conducting electricity, and about how he applied certain technological advances for his science, and how that could tie into stuff like, aliens or time travel and things like that. It gets kind of out there at points, but it never loses focus and is still a very thoroughly enjoyable crime thriller on the other level. And again, Jeff Smith is the master of the quick doodle, as he gives you a nice profile of Rasl there. I gotta say, it's on par with Bone. It's a little bit more mature, delves into more adult themes than Bone ever did, but it still has quite a lot of heart, ingenuity, and expressiveness in it. That's the one thing I really enjoy about not just Jeff Smith's writing, but his artwork, is it's very expressive. It's very bold and dynamic for what it is, even though it's got a cartoony, Walt Disney-ish type of root. Let me talk a little bit about meeting Jeff Smith. Now, I'd met Jeff Smith many years before, when I was a little kid, and I was really into Bone at that point. I went and saw him at one of my local comic shops in Ohio. It was Central City Comics. It's not there anymore, don't bother looking for it. He was doing a signing at Central City, I remember one time, and my folks brought me, I didn't have the full one-volume collection of Bone that I have right now, but I had like the best of, as it were, the collected, at that point, anthologies. And I brought them in, and I had also brought in, now this is back when, I purchased a lot of video game guides at at magazine stands, and loved like the little playthrough things that showed screenshots of, here's where you do the jump, here's where you find the secret treasure, and so forth. I remember this very clearly. At age 11, I had crafted a Bone video game walkthrough guide. And I had come up with, here are the levels, here's where Phone Bone has to escape the rat creatures. And it's a good thing I can't find it now, because those drawings are kind of embarrassing now compared to the stuff I do currently. But I remember bringing it to the books for Jeff to sign, and also bringing the guide. He didn't sign my guide, but he leafed through it, and he's like, there's some good level ideas in here. I remember that much, at least, and being like, wow, you really thought out the plot line thoroughly. And I'm like, yeah, well, I read the books all the time. So I remember that distinctly carrying through. And then meeting him now, several years later, at Wizard World, in the context of a signing where I've grown up with the full Bone story, but also grown up with Rasl and kind of getting more into his mature storytelling, I plopped the complete Bone volume in front of him, and everyone in line in front of me had the same volume. Like, everyone knows him for that book. I don't think he begrudges anyone for, saying, can you sign my copy of Bone? Like, it put him on the map. It got him to where he is now, where he can basically do whatever project he wants. So I'm sure he's not like, another Bone signing, but you could tell, like, he's like, oh, cool, another one. Yeah, sure. Let me give you my classic phone Bone signature. And then I pop Rasl in front of him. And his eyes kind of light up. Like, he's like, Rasl? You enjoy Rasl? Like, he got enthusiastic that I brought the book for the signing. I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I love Rasl. This is the shit. And we started talking, and he starts talking about, like, no, I just loved all the theories of Tesla and how it ties into, like, Roswell and things like that, and yada, yada, yada. And he's like, just the random conspiracy theories just fascinate me that he got really passionate. It was fun to kind of pick his brain for a couple of minutes about, why'd you want to write a story like that? And then I remember him saying, because it was something drastically different from Bone. And I think that was the idea, was to kind of challenge himself to do something beyond just the fantasy epic that everyone knows him for. Is to do something maybe a little bit more grounded, a little bit more gritty. The fact that I was able to kind of get a little bit more in depth. Like, I poked and prodded him a little bit about, like, when are the Lantern publications or, redistribution coming out? And again, help me out with that, because I've seen those strips before and I really like them. I know he might not be that proud of them, but I really like those strips. Yeah, it was cool just to meet him again. I doubt he recognized me at all because, I'm several feet taller at this point and not as fresh-faced a kid as I was. Didn't have my little Bone video game guide. I should have dug that up. I really should have. I should have dug that up while I was at home and be like, let's see if he remembers this. Jeff Smith has always been kind of one of those inspirations for me whenever I'm thinking of something in terms of graphic design or cartooning. Is I always kind of have his sense of design and layout in mind. I'm currently working on something right now, again, a kind of a collaboration with Max from 3 Geeks Podcast. We're back and forth right now, preliminary stages, but hopefully we'll have something out eventually. But as I'm plotting and pacing a story, I'm thinking in terms of Jeff Smith's plotting and pacing. Yeah, you can tell he's got an animator's design sense or an animator's pacing in his blood, because there's stuff in the panels of Bone where it'll play out in just one page, like long, similar looking panels, and only the slightest detail changes, but it makes all the difference. Like the slightest wince in a character's expression throughout like 4 panels. It makes it all the more charming, all the more expressive, all the more engaging. It's not like, what a lot of comics do when there is particular action is that splash page, smash cut to this action now, just because it's dynamic looking, but doesn't make any sense within context of the character's movement. So whenever I'm plotting something out or I'm sketching out ideas, I'm thinking Jeff Smith. So I owe the man a lot with regards to his influence on my particular style when it comes to artwork. Aside from just artwork, the storytelling is really solid in both of these books. And yes, again, I'm saying they're books. Like, I put these right next to my Stephen King's or my J.R.R. Tolkien's. They have every right to kind of stand side by side as serious pieces of literature. I recommend the complete Bone saga and Rasl. And if ever you see Jeff Smith in the Ohio area or touring the convention circuits, by all means, bring some of his stuff over and have him sign it. The dude's a really great guy, and I owe him a lot. So thank you, Mr. Jeff Smith. Not just for the signatures, not just for the great content, but for kind of being a great gold standard when it comes to comic book artistry and overall storytelling. Till next time.